Hello everybody from Pakistan! While I'm on my trip around this magnificent but extremely hot country, Eduard, the founder of our channel, has interviewed the American-Ukrainian historian Serhiy Plokhy. Many of you know him from books on history of Ukraine, Eastern Europe, Cold War studies, and this time Professor Plokhy tells us about his new book, Nuclear Folly, a history of the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis seems to be a very well-researched topic with dozens of books devoted to it. How did you come to think that you have something new to say about it?
Thank you. This is an excellent question. After writing and publishing my book on the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, I decided to write a book on the general history of the nuclear energy. And then it evolved into a book on the nuclear arms race. And I started working on that book and eventually got to the history of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I was supposed to write just one chapter dealing with the Cuban Missile Crisis. But the topic turned out to be so complex. There is so much has been published about it that I got probably much deeper into that subject than I ever expected to get. And what I found there once I started to look at the literature, existing literature on one side and sources on the other, was that there was no direct match. So there was what I would call a lot of mythology around the Cuban Missile Crisis that didn't correspond to the primary sources that I worked with. So there is an image of Kennedy as a young but wise man who understands everything from the very beginning, who reads Khrushchev in the right way. And I found him actually being certainly confused at the very beginning, being very aggressive at the start, making all sorts of mistakes. And the same, of course, was true for Khrushchev, and for the role of Castro became extremely important, something that is not part of the narrative of the Cuban Missile Crisis, how it exists here in the United States. So that was the first incentive. And then I was lucky enough to find in the KGB archives in Kiev reports of the KGB officers who accompanied the Soviet ships that brought missiles, that brought military personnel to Cuba. Around 80% of all the missiles and all of the troops, over 43,000 people that were shipped to Cuba were shipped through the Ukrainian ports. Sevastopol, Mykolaiv, Odessa, and so on and so forth. And each of those ships, they had a KGB officer who was reporting back. And those reports are now available in Kiev, in the former KGB archive. And I was really very lucky in a sense that the archivist there helped me to find those documents. Probably I was the first and still am the only historian who consulted those materials. So once that happened, once I had this serious questions about the existing narrative, and once I had new sources to add to the discussion, I decided that I should really expand the chapter into a book, and that's how the book came into existence.
Could you please tell us more about the new sources you used while writing the book, except for the KGB documents in Kiev?
Another sources were, most of them were published. Again, I tried to get to the archives, military archives in Ukraine, but it didn't work because, as I was informed, the archives of the military units that were at Cuba were transferred from Ukraine to Moscow back in mid-1970s. And the 43rd Missile Army that was located in Ukraine, and most of the missiles to Cuba were missiles of that 43rd Army, so their archives were not there anymore. Also, tried to work in the archives of the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, mostly dealing with the activities of the United Nations. There were some interesting materials, but not much. So when it comes to non-archival sources, what I really did, not exactly pioneered, but certainly I contributed to that trend. I brought a lot of materials from the Soviet side. Those are memoirs of the Soviet participants of the events, and some also materials from the party archive that are now available including online. For example, one of those documents is the letter, the draft of the letter of Khrushchev to Kennedy that was released and is on the website now for a couple of years. It was released in relation to the special exhibition that one of the Russian archives made on the occasion of the anniversary, it seems to be 100-year anniversary of Khrushchev. And again, it's somewhere there on the website, but no historian of the Cuban Missile Crisis really looked at that letter, at that draft of the letter, which is very interesting, where Khrushchev compares actions of Kennedy to actions of Hitler. So it's very, very aggressive in tone. And I was able to locate or to place that draft of the letter specifically in the time and in the particular moment of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and explain why it was drafted and why it was never sent. So there were those documents as well. Again, in terms of the new documents, almost all coming from the Soviet side. And I also worked with the recently meaning within the last 10 years, some of the papers of Robert Kennedy. Again, some of them are available online, others are not, but they were not also integrated into this writing of the Cuban Missile Crisis. So those are other sources that I bring to the fore in my book.
As we know, access to many documents of the Soviet period that are stored in Russia, especially the KGB documents, is limited. Have you made an attempt to work with them?
No, I didn't try to do that. Basically, what I relied on were on the published documents, either available online or maybe appearing otherwise. Most of the Soviet documents, specifically dealing with the crisis, have been released in the last 20 or so years, and even translated into English, and are available now on the websites, either the Security Archive or the Woodrow Wilson Center. Most of those documents are the documents with which the authors of a very good book, One Hell of a Gamble, it's Forsenko and Naftali. They worked on that in the 1990s. Forsenko, who is of course the father of one of the people now very close to the Russian president, Vladimir Putin. So Forsenko back then in the 1990s, he was a major figure also in the historiographic establishment in Russia and had unprecedented access to those materials. The 1990s were generally much more liberal in terms of the access to the Russian archives. And then after the publication of the book, one of the criticism that came after the book was out was, okay, guys, you did a wonderful job, but no one can check those documents. No one has access to them. How can we trust you? And to their credit, they did an excellent job making those documents available. By the way, after publication of my book, people from the Woodrow Wilson Center approached me and asked whether I would be willing also to donate to the archive the KGB reports and sources that I used in my book, and they're going to translate them. So I said that, yes, I'm interested in doing that. Maybe not right away. I'm still working on some of those documents, but eventually, yes, absolutely. So this is a great service to the field and ability for others to actually check how good your interpretation of those sources is. So that openness is an important factor in the development of field in general. So the sources that maybe you had exclusive access to them for one reason or another, but they should be available to your peers in the field to really function properly.
How did the personal characteristics of the Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev influence the course of those events?
Khrushchev certainly was a key figure in the crisis. The crisis started because of the decisions that were made by Nikita Khrushchev, and he was really calling the shots. So it was his idea to place the missiles on Cuba. He was under pressure from a number of directions. One of them was that Fidel Castro demanded more help and assistance, given that Castro expected the another American invasion of the island. Given that Khrushchev was reluctant either to admit him into the communist club, to admit that he was a communist, or was reluctant to provide the military assistance that Castro wanted, Castro then opened a war on the old-time Cuban communists in Cuba, removing them from key positions. And there were rumors that he would actually can switch sides in this communist competition between Moscow and Beijing and would join Mao Zedong. So Khrushchev had to do something to prove that he is a good partner and that he can protect Cuba. On the other hand, it became clear to Khrushchev exactly in spring of 1962 that his hope that his missile designers would be able to produce the missiles that would be a match to the American Minutemen that were at that time were about to be deployed. That those hopes were actually wouldn't materialize, that he had needed years and years to develop the Soviet missile technology to match the American Minutemen. And he didn't have enough missiles, maybe not more than 10, that would actually reach the United States from the territory of the Soviet Union. So his solution was to take the missiles that were produced in Ukraine, in Dnipro at that time. So the so-called R-12 and R-14, so medium range and intermediate missiles that were created for the war in the European theater, could reach Paris, Berlin, maybe Madrid, depending on where they were located. So taking them, putting them in Cuba, and in that sense, addressing this disbalance in missile power between the two main adversaries in the Cold War. He also believed that it would be easy to do, and that Kennedy would swallow that pill, because the Americans put their medium range or intermediate range missiles in Turkey, and Khrushchev accepted that. So he believed that would be acceptable behavior on his part. And that was a huge misunderstanding, miscalculation, not so much of the way how Kennedy would react to that, but as the American political class and the American society as a whole would react. For them, it was absolutely unimaginable. And it's unimaginable even today. You talk to people to journalists, you talk to people in Washington, they're still amazed what kind of chutzpah the Soviet leader needed to put that in Cuba. This is so close to our borders. So again, that kind of attitude is still alive today, and certainly it was there in 1962. So Khrushchev was a key figure. It was his decision. By that time, by 1962, he had full control over the presidium. So people were silent. People didn't want to challenge him. The only person who dared to do that was Anastas Mikoyan, who was on par with Khrushchev, but he was left alone. He didn't have allies in the presidium, and certainly Khrushchev did what he wanted, and that was a huge mistake. Others, including the foreign minister Gromyko, if one trusts his memoirs, which is a big question, but if one trusts his memoirs, he says that he was gently trying to dissuade Khrushchev from putting missiles in Cuba, exactly saying that it would be an explosion in the United States. So it was a Khrushchev's operation from the beginning to the end. And the system that he built at that time was that people were not able to say no to him, to a degree that advisors to Kennedy were very open. The speak up culture was there, again, to a certain degree, but certainly they could say once or twice that, okay, Mr. President, we don't think this is the case. We should do something else. That was not an option in Moscow in 1962, which is, on the one hand, the country that's run by authoritarian leader can be much more fast in terms of adopting to the changing situation and making decisions. On the other hand, it's very clear that the decisions that are made by one person are problematic at best. When Khrushchev was removed in 1964, his handling of the Cuban Missile Crisis was cited by people in the presidium who were silent at that time, like Brezhnev, like others, as an argument that actually his policy was wrong, that he was unstable, that almost those actions almost brought a nuclear war and spoiled relations between the Soviet Union and Cuba. So that's Khrushchev in 62 is already very much an autocrat, to a degree that he certainly was not in 1955, for example.
You wrote on Facebook, "It was extremely interesting to work on this particular book, if only to learn that every single missile delivered to Cuba was made on the street I used to live in the city of Dnipropetrovsk." Can you tell us more about the atmosphere of this city during Soviet times? Was the production of rockets an important part of the identity of the locals?
Certainly it was an important part of the identity of people in that time, Dnipropetrovsk. The city was closed city, first and foremost because of the Pivden Mash, but there were also other enterprises and firms there that were involved were part of the military-industrial complex. And it was coming with a sort of a pride, right? So there was a belief that the Pivden Mash was making a major contribution to the Soviet defenses. In the 50s and 60s, there was a saying among the military, and I'll quote that in Russian as it was, and then try to translate. So it was saying, the saying went as, Korolev работает на ТАСС, Янгель работает на нас. So that Korolev, the designer of the Sputnik, was working for the TASS, which was the Soviet information agency, meaning that he was working for the propaganda effort. But it's Yangel, the chief designer in Dnipropetrovsk, who was actually really providing missiles for us, for the army. So that was, and again, it was half of a joke, but it was also very, very true, certainly through 60s and 70s. And as I write in my book, every single ballistic missile that was delivered to Cuba was made in Dnipropetrovsk. And those that were not delivered are 14 intermediate missiles that were turned back after the blockade was introduced. They were also made in Dnipropetrovsk. So again, that in every joke, there is a grain of truth, and there was a lot of truth in that particular joke. So that identity was there. To a degree, it is reflected in the title of the book that is written by my colleague and friend and colleague then back in the Department of History at the University of Dnipropetrovsk, Serhiy Plokhy, who wrote on a book on rock and roll in the Rocket City. So about the Western influences in the closed city of the Soviet Union. The university that I went to as a student and then where I was teaching, certainly the missiles were an important part of the identity of the university, because the physical technical department or faculty, that was the place where the key figures in the Soviet missile industry were trained, including among the alumni was, of course, Leonid Kuchma, the president of Ukraine in the 1990s and the beginning of the 2000s. It seems to me Gorbulin also was his chief international advisor was coming from there, and so on and so forth. And so the university had this special status and was under the direct authority of the all-union Ministry of Higher Education, not of the Republican Ministry, again, partially because of this close connection to the military-industrial complex. We didn't know much what was going there, what was being made, what not. But there was this kind of an aura that, yes, there is something important is being done there, that it's about missiles. And there was also a part of that Pivdan Marsh that was producing, was not working on the missiles, but were building in particular the tractors, for example. And there were jokes all around the city about the Soviet peaceful tractor that is working somewhere in the Cuba and then turns around and fires missiles. So it was kind of an open secret and the reason to be kind of proud. We are so important part of this not just nuclear arms race, which it was understood, but also that it was the part of the space age. In 60s and 70s, that's where every second boy wanted to be a cosmonaut. And again, there was a lot of romantic aura around this whole thing. So that was the cutting edge of technology. And again, from what I remember, again, that wasn't a cause of any reason to be somehow unhappy or ashamed, but on contrary, there was this that was part of the identity of the university and part of the identity of the city.
Can we call one of the parties to this conflict a winner?
Okay, this is an excellent question, and we can call all sides in that conflict winners and losers at the same time. The biggest winner who believed that he was a loser was Fidel Castro. He was really upset by the way how the conflict was resolved. At some point, he was advocating Soviet nuclear attack, preemptive Soviet nuclear attack on the United States. He protested the withdrawal of the missiles from Cuba. He was really making life difficult for Khrushchev. And one of the main reasons was that he called himself a communist. He maybe believed that he was a communist, but he was the leader of this anti-colonial, anti-imperialist revolution. He was not there running this revolution to replace one master of the United States with another master of the Soviet Union. He was not there to be pushed around. So for him, the fact that Khrushchev and Kennedy reached the deal on Cuba, on missiles that are on his territory, without even consulting him or informing him, was basically a major attack, assault, not just on his ego and identity, but on the identity of his anti-imperial, anti-colonial revolution. So he was genuinely upset and very, very difficult to deal with. But on the other hand, his regime was saved by that deal, right? The United States gave the promise that they wouldn't launch another attack on Cuba, another landing on the Cuban soil, and they stuck to the word. So the Castro regime that only now comes to an end with Raul Castro stepping down, it would be impossible without the Cuban Missile Crisis. So de facto, Castro was the biggest winner, but considered himself to be a loser in this whole situation. With Khrushchev, it's also very interesting that he was trying to prove to everybody that he was a winner. And technically he was. He started the Cuban Missile Crisis with the American missiles being in Turkey, in his backyard, and with Cuba being under threat of being attacked by the United States. He ends the crisis with the Americans agreeing to withdraw missiles from Turkey, and they do that, and given a promise not to invade Cuba, that they honor. But the world considered him to be a loser. And the reason for that was that what was out there for everyone to see was a humiliating withdrawal of the Soviet missiles and troops from Cuba. And the part about the American withdrawal from Turkey remained to be secret. And it was communicated to Khrushchev that, okay, if it's not secret, we will not be able to do that. So you have to keep quiet about that. And his own colleagues or clients in the presidium of the Central Committee were really scared, like Khrushchev was. So that they believed that the price that was paid for those concessions on the part of the United States was too high, that the chances of the nuclear war was too high. So he was perceived as a loser by the world, and eventually the Cuban adventure contributed to his downfall in 1964. And Kennedy was basically a winner more than anybody else in the eyes of the public opinion. So he was before that perceived as indecisive, young, inexperienced, and a weak president. After the Cuban Missile Crisis, his statue actually is growing. He becomes the Kennedy that we know today in terms of mythology about Kennedy. And Khrushchev recognizes that. Even before the Cuban Missile Crisis, it's Khrushchev who is calling the shots. He's in the driving seat. After the agreement to withdraw nuclear weapons, it's Kennedy who is actually now in charge. The power relations between those leaders changed, and Kennedy and Democrats score a very significant victory in the elections in November of 1962. So not only that they have the Democratic president in the White House, but they also improved their position in the Congress, which was unheard of. So that there was immediate political gain for Kennedy, and also long-term political gain for Kennedy. In terms of Kennedy being on the loser side, again, it's he withdraws the missiles from Turkey, but he didn't want them there anyway. He believed that they were sitting ducks to be attacked by the Soviets. So they didn't want the missiles there at all. Where he finds himself in a very, very tricky situation is the secret deal over Turkey, because he lies to everybody. He lies to even to some members of the executive committee, to the Eisenhower, to Truman, to all his predecessors. He says that deal never took place. And he was in a tough spot, because if Khrushchev would decide to disclose the deal, he would be exposed. So there was this, he added one more skeleton to his closet. But overall, it was a huge political gain for Kennedy.
What will be the topic of your next book?
I'm working on a number of projects, so it's the question of which will come first. But most likely, the next book will be the continuation of, again, one of the tracks from the Chernobyl book, and this is looking at the history of the nuclear energy through the history of the nuclear disasters, like Chernobyl, Fukushima, 3 Mile Island, and so on and so forth. So that is, to a degree, a part of this project that I started, out of which the Cuban Missile Crisis emerged. And this book on the nuclear disasters is basically another branch of the same work, of the same kind of a front, in terms of me trying to understand the nuclear age. So what is in common is between the Cuban Missile Crisis and this new book on the nuclear disasters is the attempt to understand the impact of nuclear age on, when it comes to the military, to the international relations, but also when it comes to the issues of energy and transformation generally of our life overall. So that will be the next book.
Okay. Professor Plokhii also has answered several questions sent by our subscribers. Name 3 positive aspects of the Soviet system.
Well, I'm not sure about 3, but let me see what I can come up with. Well, the education is certainly a major change that was introduced with the Soviet, in the Soviet Union. Again, it started in the 1920s and 1930s. So that was a huge boost in general to the population at large. And the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, but some of the again, institutions of higher learning, the schools, scientific schools, academic schools, actually continued and survived, and are thriving even today. Not all of them, but some. So what was negative about that education and science system is that the driving force was really the military industrial complex, the militarization. So the schools that survived and were the strongest were the ones that actually, in one way or another, were part of that militarization of the economy. But again, certainly education is a big plus. And when you think about the medicine and healthcare and other things, we are, for very good reasons, extremely unhappy with the legacy of the Soviet Union in that field. I don't remember meeting anyone in the late Soviet years who would be happy with the medical system in the Soviet Union. But if you look at that historically, and you look at what was there in the at the beginning of the century, that was a huge improvement of the introduction of that medical system, eventually overproduction of the medical doctors. That contributed to improvement of the health of the society. So again, how that was paid for is another question. I can't. 99.9% of medical professionals in the field today in the former Soviet Union are extremely unhappy with the remuneration that they're getting. This is really nothing compared to the way how the medical doctors are paid in outside of the former Soviet Union. But again, that was certainly at that time a major positive thing and major transformation. So all of that is happening, of course, against the background of Gulag. All of that is happening against the background of repressions of the highly authoritarian system, regime, ideologization of everything, things. But education and Medicare, certainly, at least in the early stages of the Soviet Union, that was a major positive factor and positive development.
Do you have your favorite, the most extravagant, funny conspiracy theory about the collapse of the USSR?
I don't know how funny it is, but certainly it is a well established, that the collapse of the Soviet Union, this is the result of the result of the actions of the United States. And not only that, but allegedly there was some kind of a Harvard project to destroy the Soviet Union, and it was implemented. So I'm at Harvard now already for more than 10 years. I keep looking around, finding any traces of the Harvard project to destroy the Soviet Union. I couldn't find any. So this is the funny part. The established part is really that the United States wanted to destroy the Soviet Union. In my book, The Last Empire, I'm really arguing against that well-established mythology, and not just saying that, okay, the United States were not part in that story in the way how the conspiracy theory suggests, but that the United States up until December of 1991 were doing everything in their power, diplomatically, economically, and otherwise, to keep the Soviet Union going and preclude it from disintegration. So in that sense, that conspiracy theory is just complete opposite to the reality. And again, the United States didn't want the collapse of the Soviet Union because they were comfortable with Gorbachev. They were comfortable with that partnership that was developed. And they were afraid, for very good reason, but they were afraid that the next war, like the war that is going today between Russia and Ukraine, would be fought with the help of the nuclear weapons. So Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, those were the countries, the newly emerging countries at that time that had nuclear weapons, and this proliferation of the nuclear weapons was a major concern, the main concern of the United States when it comes to the future of the Soviet Union. And to address that concern, the easiest way was to keep the Soviet Union together.
What was the role of the KGB in the collapse of the USSR?
The question, the question formulated broadly, I don't know as an institution, but I certainly know what we all know, that the key figure in the coup of August of 1991 was the head of the KGB, Vladimir Kryuchkov. So, and from that point of view, even the Communist Party, which was weakened at that time, was playing a secondary role. So in the driving seat, trying to save the Soviet Union the way how it was before, was the KGB. But that, or at least the leadership of the KGB. But why I made that qualifier at the beginning, that I don't know about the organization as a whole, is because you have a people who then replaced Kryuchkov as Shebarshin, who was the leader, the chief of the foreign intelligence service of the KGB, who actually didn't go to work that day, and demonstratively was playing tennis to just send a signal to everybody that I am not part of that. You look at the behavior of someone like Vladimir Putin, who is at that time aide to Sobchak, and his loyalty is at least divided between his KGB boss and his new boss Sobchak. So there is a lot of KGB officers that are sitting on the fence, looking how it would go, how it would develop. So like any institution, KGB is divided, but the key figures in the KGB, like Kryuchkov, they are the driving force behind the coup.
Which three words could describe the life in the USSR based on your personal experience?
The experience is that in my generation, I don't remember people truly believing in the communist ideology. In my generation, the attitude was at least skeptical. So the system from that point of view outlived its welcome when it comes to younger people. And also I remember excitement really with the election of Gorbachev and the start of Glasnost and the hopes that were associated with that. So again, my memories, to a degree that, again, there are memories also of a particular group of people of my generation, again, university educated and the so-called intelligentsia, was that there was no love lost between our group and the Soviet ideology and the communist project as a whole. So that is on that level. And on the level of just the everyday life, what we see is really the culture of shortages that starts, in my memory, since the year 1975, and then goes down and down and down. It's more and more difficult to get some basic things, food, clothing, and really it culminates in the complete collapse by 1990 and 91. So in economic terms, looking from the street, from the Soviet street of a young man, student, and then young professional, it's the system that is in economic decline, that can't feed and can't provide enough goods for their people. So there is no increase in the standard of living. There is decline that, in my memory, goes since 1975 and for the rest of the Soviet era. Of course, then come 1990, complete collapse. But again, it's not that the products or the food is not available, it's not accessible in terms of the inflation, in terms of the prices, and so on and so forth. But the economic story of the Soviet Union is that you start working, your salary increases, so on and so forth. But what you can afford there is less and less and less of that.
I hope you have enjoyed the interview. Buy Serhiy Plokhy's new book and don't forget to subscribe our channel. Soon I will come back home and we'll make new episodes. See you!